morning we're going to continue our journey through the book of Numbers. And remember, we're in that section where the people of Israel are sort of in transit from Mount Sinai onto the Promised Land. And I've tried to make the point that one of the things that we can learn from this journey is there's sort of some important lessons about the life of faith that the people of Israel learned that we can benefit from. So I'm going to continue on that theme. And we're going to take a look at two more forms of rebellion. So as I mentioned last time, between the time that they depart from Mount Sinai until the time that they are about to arrive in the Promised Land, the people of Israel rebel against God 7 times. And that number is significant, right? Because it indicates completeness. It indicates the sort of the complete rebellion of the people of Israel against God. And so we're going to take a look at 2 more forms of rebellion. The first one is the less serious, and then we're going to get to almost like the rebellion in chapter 13, which is a fascinating narrative, but it also, I think, has a lot to say to us. So let's take a look at the rebellion number 3. This is in Numbers 12, 1 through 16 or thereabouts. I'll read part of it, and then I'll say a couple things about it. So this rebellion centers on Miriam, Moses' sister, and Aaron, the high priest of Israel and Moses' brother. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, notice this, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses?" That's the question they raise. "Has he not spoken through us also?" Okay? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. Moses was the meekest person in the world. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and to Miriam, "Come out, you 3, to the tent of meeting." The three of them came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. Now, when God summons you to the tent of meeting for a little talk, that's usually never good. Okay? And in this case, it's not. And he said, "Hear my words. If there was a prophet among you, I, the Lord, would make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then have you not been afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And then what happens is that the kind of the result of this is that Miriam is immediately afflicted with leprosy, rendering her unclean, and so she has to be taken out of the camp. Aaron is immediately sort of pushed into repentance, and so in Numbers 12:11 he says to his brother, "O my Lord, do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned." So let's take a look at what's going on here. Here we have another form of rebellion. It's a rebellion against Moses, ostensibly, but of course ultimately it's a rebellion against God. And we want to kind of notice the motivating factor, the motivating force of the rebellion. Both Moses and Miriam raised the question, is Moses like the only one through whom God speaks? Surely he's spoken through us too. We should be getting the kind of respect and, awe and honor that is coming to him. We don't want to be left out. We're important too. Everybody look at us. That's kind of what's going on. Now I think the key thing here is to note, as I said, how Moses is described. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. Important to remember here, right, in the Beatitudes, remember what one of the Beatitudes is? Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So we want to think about what meekness here means, and it's really important not to sort of equate meekness with weakness. Okay? Moses is not weak. That's not what's being said here. He's meek, but he's not weak. And meekness here, I think maybe the best way to translate this is to think about it this way. Moses is a person who has a proper humility before God. That is, Moses is operating in a kind of a life pattern which looks something like this. First of all, Moses acknowledges that God is the creator and he's a creature. So there's one thing. And the second thing is Moses acknowledges that he's playing a role in God's purposes, but that he himself is not the center of those purposes. Okay? So it's really important to get this straight, right? Moses is not kind of like a self-apologetic kind of weak person. He's not going in front of Israel and he's not saying, oh, now, I know that I'm a nobody and I don't know anything and I can't do anything right and I have no leadership skills, but I still want you all to follow me. That's not what he's saying. Many years ago, there was a cartoon in the Anglican Digest which shows sort of like a senior warden talking to, the parish priest. And the senior warden says in the caption, he says, Father, I think your sermons would be more effective if you didn't end every one of them by saying, but then what do I know? Yes. Right? So Moses is not in that place, right? Moses is not weak. He simply is in that important place of acknowledging that God's the creator, he's a creature. And Moses is also in that place where he acknowledges that God has a large purpose. He's playing a role in that purpose, but he's not really the center of it. And so notice what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:5, right? Those are the kind of people who are going to inherit the earth. So the opposite of meekness here is not strength, but rather the opposite of meekness here is arrogance. That's the sin that both Miriam and Aaron commit here. The sin of thinking, right, that I have to sort of like be the center of things, right? That, God couldn't simply have spoken through Moses. Somehow God's doing something through me and I need to be acknowledged as important and, da-da-da-da-da. So we have kind of an arrogance that slips in here. And I think that's a really important thing to notice, because notice this. God takes this opportunity to, in effect, make it clear that he actually does speak through Moses and not through Aaron or Miriam. That is, in effect, right, God sort of steps in and confirms Moses' authority. So we have something really important going on here, right? We have a person who's humble, and God exalts that person and in fact confirms their authority. And there's a message there, right? If you acknowledge your proper place before God, and if you allow yourself to be used by God, right, God isn't going to abandon you. He's going to sort of like stand behind you and affirm what you're doing. Whereas, right, if you're arrogant, like Moses, like Miriam and Aaron, you're going to get called to task. And that's exactly what happens here. Now, there's a scene in the Gospels that we want to kind of think about as we reflect on this little incident. It's an incident that takes place in the Gospel of Mark, in Mark 10:35 and following. The story will be familiar to everyone, but let me just read part of it to you. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." That is, James and John come to Jesus, and they're clearly misunderstanding what's going on, right? Because they're in effect saying, look, Jesus, when you hit the big time, when you roll into Jerusalem and when you take things over, we want you to give us like prime places in your government, right? I want to be Secretary of the Treasury, and my brother John here wants to be Secretary of State. Can we get your word on that? When you hit it big, we want you to make us really important people with our own designated parking places and, you know, huge staff, and everyone will know just how significant we are. It's important to notice what Jesus says to them. Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. That is, Jesus comes back and he's really blunt. He says, you know what? You guys have no idea what you're talking about. You're like clueless. You have no idea what you're talking about. So here we have another instance of folks who, in effect, right, out of their own kind of arrogance, want to have some kind of relationship with God that somehow makes them important, significant, that kind of thing. So another kind of rebellion. C.S. Lewis wrote an essay on this, which if you've never read it, you might want to read it. It's called The Inner Ring. And Lewis says, you know, that one of the great temptations of all human beings, right, is there's that temptation, right, to be part of the inner ring, part of the select group of people who really know what's going on and who make all the really important decisions, right? There's the temptation to want to be part of that group, and that raises questions, right, about what we're willing to do to get there, right? So Lewis talks about how tempting it is to want to be part of the inner ring, the folks who are in the know, who are in power, that sort of thing. A couple years ago, I was serving on a diocesan committee that really had no power at all, and so I was trying to recruit some new folks for this committee because I got made the chairman of it, and so I was trying to kind of entice them on, and I called one person that I knew pretty well, and I said, look, I'm calling you with a wonderful opportunity. This is your opportunity to wield unlimited power. Of course, he knew what committee I was trying to get him on and knew that wasn't the case at all. So, rebellion number 3. Let's take a look at rebellion number 4. This is the really serious one that I want us to focus on. This basically takes up chapters 13 and 14. So we'll take a look at it in pieces. Let's start by looking at 13, 1 through 24. I'm going to read a large part of this because it's an important narrative and you can't pull pieces out of it. So here's what happens. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. For each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord, and all of them who were the heads of the people of Israel. And these were their names, and we get a list of the names of all the 12 people that were sent. And then this, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negev and go into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time is the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Reheb near Lebahomath. And they went up to the Negev and came to Hebron. Ahimah, Shammai, Tamai, and the descendants of Anak were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between the two of them. And they also brought some pomegranates and figs. The place for the valley of Eshcol because it was the cluster of grapes that the people of Israel had cut down from there. So notice what's going on. Moses is sending out a kind of a reconnaissance party to confirm the condition of the land of Canaan. And this isn't just a reconnaissance party because Moses deliberately gets one person from each of the 12 tribes and sends a representative. And essentially, right, the purpose is to confirm what God has already told them about the land they're going to be inheriting. God's already told them this is going to be a wonderful land. It'll be a great place to be. So Moses is sending them out to kind of go out and spy out the land and come back and in effect confirm what God's already said. So this is an act of trust on Moses' part. That is, Moses really isn't expecting to really to learn anything from this scouting party. He already believes the land is good. He just wants these folks to come back and confirm to the people of Israel what God's already told them. And by way of doing this, they're going to bring back some of the produce of the land. And sure enough, that's what they do. They bring back this huge cluster of grapes and some pomegranates and some figs as the fruit, representative fruit of the land. So far, so good. Now, things start to go south, starting about 13:25 to 33, where the scouting party now makes their report, and here it is. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Okay, so far so good. They brought back this report. They bring back the fruit of the land. This is kind of what the land produces. That's good. And they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Hallelujah, right? Okay, good. However, the people that dwell in the land are strong, and their cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. That is, the scouting party becomes focused on the people who dwell in the land. And the more they focus on that, and the less they focus on what God's promised, what happens is that all their fears start to come out. And so the scouting party, in effect, says, okay, yeah, here's the produce of the land. The land's really, really good, just as God said it was. But you know what? There are giants there. We have no chance. The land of Canaan is a death trap. Flee. Wonderful, right? In the midst of that, this is what Caleb says. So Caleb here is like the one good guy, okay? Caleb says, but Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. That's Caleb's message. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to come up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report that the land that they'd spied out, saying, the land through which you have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. It's haunted. It's awful. If we go there, we will all die. And then when they saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. That is, and besides that, everyone who lives in that place is a giant. They're all 10 feet tall. No, they're 11 feet tall. No, they're all 13 feet tall. They're awful. And so notice what's happened. And here's the lesson. Notice what they've done. They've shifted from focusing on what God promised them. The land I'm giving you is good, and I will make sure that you actually settle there. They've shifted away from that, and now guess what's happened? They've become engulfed in their own fears. I think there's a really important lesson here. It's a lesson that really carries over into the New Testament, and it's this simple lesson. Faith and fear are opposites. Fear is a sign of a lack of faith, a lack of trust. right? Did God promise them at any time that there would be no difficulties taking the land of Canaan? No. He did promise them the land was good, and he also promised them that he would be with them every step of the way. But they've decided, right, they are now focused on the difficulties, and now that's all they see. And now they're scared stiff. So what we see here is fear, in effect, right, short-circuiting and undercutting faith. And now they're ready to turn and run. And that's actually what happens in the next scene, which is in 14:1 through 10. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, now, notice what the congregation says to Moses and Aaron. Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, and would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? But notice what they do. First, they start complaining about Moses and Aaron, right? Almost along the lines of, Moses and Aaron, this was all your idea. It's your fault that we're in this position. And then they shift to complaining about God. Oh my gosh, God's brought us out in the wilderness. God's brought us to this place so that we would all be like slaughtered by these 15-foot giants. That's been his purpose all along. And so now, right, they've gone from not merely not trusting God to having like really deep and finally inaccurate suspicions about what God's purposes are. That is, they're now like totally off center. Okay, the people of Israel are here like totally off course at this point. And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And there it is. We're going to dump Moses, who's gotten us into this mess, and we are going to march back to Egypt because, as we all know, right, Egypt was a wonderful place. And that's where we're going. So notice what we've got here. Once we focus on our own fears, once we cease to trust God, right, we really see no real opportunity for change or transformation, and we're just going to simply go back to the way that things were. Now, there's a wonderful old theological term that describes this situation perfectly, and part of I'm part of a movement to bring this word back. So here it is. The word is sloth. The people of Israel here are afflicted with sloth, and what sloth means is it's not just like laziness. It's not just like, the couch potato who's lounging on their easy blue recliner watching endless things on Netflix, although that's sloth too. Sloth here in this sense, right, is that out there in front of you is some spiritual good that you really need. But the thought of moving from here to there and the difficulties that you might endure has totally unnerved you, so you're not moving. Right? You know there's something good out there, but you also know that it might be difficult to get it, and so you're giving up. That is spiritual sloth. Right? It's like, I probably would be a better person if I prayed more often, but it's just too darn difficult. Or, I probably would be a better Christian if I kind of got out of my own little narrow orbit of things and did some real service, but that sounds awfully difficult, so I'm not going to do it. That's sloth. A kind of a fear of any real sort of like exertion or effort that might need to be poured. And that's where the people of Israel here are as a result of their own fear. So they're going to dump Moses, and they're going to head back to Egypt. Now notice what happens next. Now if I were Moses at this point, I would say, you know what? You don't need to fire me as your leader because I quit. Okay, here's my resignation. You do whatever you want. I'm out of here. That's not what happens. Here's what happens in Numbers 14:5. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jehoshaphat, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes as a sign of repentance, right? You tear your clothes as a sign of repentance. And said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy is out. It is a good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. So notice Joshua and Caleb speak a word of truth, right? They're saying, wait a minute. Look, God promised to give us this land, and as you just found out, right, the land is exactly the way he described it. It's good. It's exactly what we need. It's ideal for us, and he's with us. And don't be afraid of the enemies, because God's going to enable us to overcome all the obstacles. God's with us. All you folks need to do is trust him. And to that, the people of Israel do this in 14:10. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Kill them. Kill Joshua. Kill Caleb. They're saying things that we don't want to hear. Now, I think that's instructive, right? Because we have a similar scene in the book of Acts, right? Remember in Acts 4, there's Stephen, remember, the first martyr, as far as we know? Remember, he gives that kind of that long history of Israel where he kind of recounts Israel's continual rebellion against the Lord. And he's treated with, okay, you've said enough, Mr. Stephen. And they stoned him to death. But the picture here, right, is now that Israel is so far off course, they don't trust in God, they're now attributing awful motives to God, and this is sort of the last step, right? They have now sort of closed their ears to the possibility of listening to the truth, right? I already know what I believe. Don't confuse me with evidence. Shut up. Okay, and so that's kind of where they are now. Now, notice what happens next. This is the next section of the narrative. This is 14:10 through 35. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will this people despise me?" Notice that, right? The people of Israel despise God. They don't trust him. They've attributed evil motives to him. They're rebelling against him. God says, how long are they going to despise me? Right? And how long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs that I've done among them. I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a greater nation and mightier than they. So God says, okay, look, here's what I'm going to do, Moses. I'm going to wipe all of them out. And I'll start over a new people with you, and they'll actually be better than the old Israel. Now, once again, if I were Moses, I'd say, yeah, when do you start? Get rid of them now. That's not what happens. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for you brought us up for you brought up this people in your midst among them. And they will tell the inhabitants of this land, they have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of the people. For you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, it is because the Lord is not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give to them, that he's killed them in the wilderness. And now please let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised, saying, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and to the third and fourth generations. Please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now. So 2 things about this that we wanted to just sort of note here, and then we'll have to stop. Thing number 1. Notice here Moses underlines the fact that right from the start, God has had to forgive the people of Israel again and again and again and again and again and again. Moses reminds God of this, and he's asking for that to happen once more. The second thing, and this is also important too, I think one thing that's emerging here is, notice what Moses does. Moses has been essentially rejected by the people. They've complained about him over and over again. They've attributed false motives to him. They've criticized him. Every time something's gone wrong, they've blamed him for their plight. And Moses' response to all this is he intercedes on their behalf before God. In this sense, right, I think this is important, Moses is something of a Christ figure, right? Moses here, in effect, kind of is sort of giving us a sense of the role that Christ is going to play, right? Who, although he's rejected, nevertheless intercedes on the part of those who have rejected him. We read from the Gospel of Luke this Sunday, and of course we remember that in Luke's Gospel, right, remember Jesus' final words from the cross are, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That, in effect, is Moses' stance here, interceding on behalf of the people of Israel. Now, one more thing, and then we'll stop. One of the things that happens here to kind of bring this story to a conclusion, I think there's a warning here that apart from faith and apart from genuine trust in God, the thing that ultimately happens is that people will sort of like slide into a state of despair. That they'll sort of lose any sense that anything really might change about them, and that what will happen, right, is they'll simply go back to Egypt. And that's what, right, shouldn't happen, right? Especially when this path has been opened for them into the promised land, right? Their own despair is almost like acting as a way of like shutting the door into the promised land for them. So this is where hope and trust and faith are really, really important. So another important lesson. We'll read about now the fifth rebellion next week. It's not as serious as this, but we just want to keep our minds on 2 things now. We've now seen Israel kind of rebel against God in 2 really significant ways. One was way back in Exodus 32 with the golden calf, so false worship. And now we've seen another significant rebellion with a kind of loss of trust and a slide in despair. And so those kind of will define the kind of the sort of depths of sin, right? False worship, loss of trust, slide in despair. Israel will kind of move back and forth between those 2 things. And it'll be God's job to kind of continue to try to pull them back and get them centered so that they can move forward. We'll take a look at the 5th rebellion next Sunday.